Hello, I'm Helen Foray. On today's program, All Aboard Florida is preparing to begin rail work between West Palm Beach and Miami. Where will we see a bigger benefit, with tourism or local commuting? But first, South Florida residents are all too familiar with daily traffic congestion. A decade ago, residents of Miami-Dade County were hopeful a half-penny tax would help traffic by funding upgrades to public transportation. But that's not been the case. As our community continues to grow, what are the real solutions? Joining me to share his ideas on fixing traffic, we welcome Miami-Dade County Commissioner Esteban Bovo, the new chair of the County Commission's Transit and Mobility Services Committee. He also chairs District 13. Commissioner, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you wrote an op-ed that came out in the Miami Herald this week, which says, it's titled, "Let's Provide Residents with Real Transit Solutions." Nobody would disagree with you. And one of the first things people would say is, please stop making studies. They're expensive. Don't know if anybody ever really reads them, but we need something now.
We think all the studies have been done. We don't think there needs to be any more studies. The reality is that we understand. It's very common sense as far as I'm concerned. But we have a car culture in our community, and we have to address that first. Our generation, Helen, for better or for worse, have been weaned on by getting a car and moving with a car. It's very rare to see a family today that does not have at least 2 or 3 cars parked in their house. If you take that car culture and realize the only way we've done transit up to this point really has been expanding highways, expanding roads. MDX now plays a big role in that. The tolling of MDX has driven people mad. You know, we've heard and we've had conversations with families that are saying to us, Commissioner, I'm spending $200 a month in tolls between my car, my wife, and my kids' cars. You know, $200 a month to a family is critical, I believe. And if you carry it out for the entire year, that's a substantial amount of money that's being spent just on tolls.
It tends to be a regressive tax that affects the poor in particular, because the poor live further out and work inside, and those are the ones who have to pay the biggest
It
tax.
affects the poor. It affects businesses that need the highways to carry you know, merchandise and whatnot. And I think the other thing that's been happening, Helen, is that now drivers are seeking alternatives. I need to get off 836 so I don't pay tolls. So what do? You get on Flagler, you get on 8th Street, and now you're taxing roads with traffic that weren't designed for that volume of traffic. So it all kind of brings us all to the center of an argument of saying, folks, what kind of real transit options are we going to give folks? How can I give something to the folks coming east-west that may force them or give them an option to say, I'm going to leave my car at home, or I'm going to park someplace and then ride?
Well, people do that illegally, perhaps, with Uber and Lyft.
Well, Uber and Lyft has come into the market and has now started filling a void, which I think there's a generation, maybe not my generation, but there's a generation that's very comfortable doing banking, flying, hotel reservations, restaurant reservations, all with the touch of their phone. They don't talk to people. I don't know how the social skills, how they're going to be, but literally they're doing all this on their phone. So now Uber and Lyft are starting to kind of fill a void of those folks that, look, don't want to have a car, don't want to drive a car, would prefer to have that Uber Lyft option to go from one point to one point.
You're certainly describing the millennials, and it also makes life a lot easier because you don't have to pay for parking, which has become, as well, because of the car culture that we have. It could be a great business, but on top of that, you have a car culture because we continue to feed it with the lack of public transportation.
True, and I have a 14-year-old daughter who's now lobbying me for a car 2 years from now, and I've got a 4-year-old son who plays with cars all the time, so I would imagine he's going to start talking about a car. In fact, he already claims that my car is his car. So
I have
that's
3 millennials, and they would gladly not drive. And they do Uber or Lyft, and they just would rather have, and the youngest in particular would rather just have public transportation. So how do we get there? When we talk about public transportation, do we have to rethink what we mean by public transportation?
Well, I do think we have to have a cultural change, and we have to also think in terms that whatever we do today is not for me per se, as it is for future generations. So we have to look at the corridors, the historic corridors that we've talked about, the north-south corridor, the east-west corridor, the corridors that are the south, basically the bus rails down south. Everything that we've talked about up to this point in our transit has all been bus-driven. And Helen, I don't know a lot of people that ride buses. I don't know a lot of people that are interested in riding buses.
It's hard to ride a bus because it's not time dependent, the locations aren't great, and our climate isn't wonderful if you have to wait 15, 20 minutes outside because you perspire.
And add to that some of the stations are like in lonely places and they're not safe. I mean, there's a reason. I mean, look, we drive to work, you see a bus, and your goal is to get in front of the bus because the bus lumbers along and slowly. So we have the bus culture, I don't think, is a solution. Interestingly, though, Helen, our community is dotted with rail lines. We have rail lines that run north and south. We have rail lines that run east and west. We have opportunities here, and what we've been exploring and what we've been talking about is how could we activate those lines? How could those lines be in play so that we could create transportation hubs and then give people real options? And I've noticed this when I go to the county. I drive to the Hialeah metro station and I park my car. And I realize I do that because it's convenient. It's there. It's close to me. That's the options that we have to give people. We have to come to the realization that if you live out in West Dade, we have to create a situation where you could perhaps park your car or somebody drop you out of a station, and that station out in West Dade would be able to bring you toward the MIC, for example. Now, when I say cultural changes, we have to understand, in the north, when you travel to DC or New York and you travel on a train, you know that you change trains. It's not one straight shot. So perhaps these are the kind of things that we have to talk to folks about. Hey, there's options for you. You may be able to take a train from Kendall, get to the MIC, do an exchange, and then get to downtown or go to another place. And that's the cultural conversation that we have to have.
There's also a cost conversation that has to be had. How are you going to finance that?
Well, all these conversations are beautiful to have. Great dialogue to have, but we need to explore funding options. I will tell you what is not on the table. Any kind of bond issue that tied to property values or property taxes is not on the table. Because
it won't be approved?
I don't
because
think
voters will not approve it, you don't think?
Because voters, I think, want to see some action.
Before they commit more?
Before the voter, and forget the fact that I'm an elected official, I'm a voter. I want to see real concrete progress before you start talking to me about anything else. So there's no half-penny conversation here, the other half-penny. Remember, there used to be a one-penny conversation. That kind of got weeded down. That's been misspent, and voters know it, and voters feel that they've been lied to. There is nothing to try to property value. So what are the options that we're looking at? And I think there are a couple that we should look at. One is efficiencies right now in our transit department. We should try to explore them and create enough money there to start moving the dial a little bit in some of the projects. MDX.
Where would you, when you say efficiencies, it's because you have found or you observe inefficiencies. Where do you see inefficiencies?
We believe that right now in our different districts, the way we run our buses that kind of like go through neighborhoods and twist and turn instead of straight line, we think that is costly. We think that it's more of a public social service than it is a transit service. We think that needs to be realigned. We need to look at the buses that we do purchase. Are they fuel efficient? How do they work? We also, I think, we need to look at our labor contracts and make sure and understand that we're not paying people that are not driving, because that happens in today's world in transit. So
what are they doing?
Well, as far as the union contracts, if somebody can't...
They're doing union work.
Well, no, if they can't drive for whatever reason, they don't send them home. They're still there and they get paid to be there. So they're not driving, but they're getting paid. But those are the minute things that we're looking at. The real areas that I think we should be looking at is, one, hotel bed tax. We were very giddy a couple of years ago, not I didn't participate in it, but we were very giddy, the mayor and a group of commissioners, to go up to Tallahassee and ask for an expansion of the bed tax to give it to the Dolphins. So
for Sun Life Stadium.
For Sun Life Stadium. I feel that perhaps tourists should be contributed to infrastructure. That requires a movement in Tallahassee to expand the bed tax use.
Which currently is at what?
I believe it's at 3%. So
you would like to see what kind of contribution on the part of tourists?
Well, I'd like to see something that would either help finance either a straight out increase of the bed tax or a tourism fee, similar to what we do when we go to Disney World. You know, I go to Disney World and you look at the taxes in Disney World. You're paying a higher rate, but you see the investment in the park, and then you're willing to swallow it a little bit because you realize you're getting quality. And if we give quality to folks, then I think they're willing to I think, basically move along and say, you know, this works for us.
Okay, so you have tourism tax, so that doesn't impact directly the homeowners
right.
here.
And there's also MDX. MDX right now, with their tolling, we believe that there's some space within their tolling that we may be able to tap into, whether it's real money or whether it's dedicated, because one of the things that MDX has the power to do is buy right-of-ways. And perhaps they could help us contribute with either money or right-of-way to be able to extend lanes.
For rapid transit buses?
I'm not a fan of buses. What I'd like to see is
rail. I see buses, not your thing.
And I think the options on the table should be light rail. Light rail should be the
What do we mean by
light
rail?
Light rail's at grade. In other words, it's not elevated. Heavy rail would be like tri-rail, where you have it elevated and you got construction and more work. The light rail, the only mechanism that we have to reconcile is when they go through an intersection. And today a train goes through an intersection, you know, the guardrails go down, the train goes through. Now we're not talking about trains that are, you know, 2 miles long. We're talking similar to tri-rail trains, you know, 2, 3 carts that just basically stream right through. We believe that if we could take care of the tri-rail connection into downtown, because it's the offering, we, with PTP money, could do about $9 million.
PTP being?
People Transportation Plan money, which was the half penny that's already been approved. We believe that there's enough money there to be able to contribute to bringing Tri-Rail into downtown. Now, what that does, once that's accomplished, okay, I believe, now start alleviating a lot of the traffic that we have on I-95. And we also have now addressed the North Corridor. The North Corridor traditionally has been known as 27th Avenue. If you go a mile to the east, you will run into the trail line, the Tri-Rail line. That Tri-Rail line into downtown may afford now folks in Broward County or in the north part of our county that use I-95, and anybody drives I-95 north or south, depending on traffic time, knows the parking lot I'm talking about. There may be a real option of getting cars off of I-95.
So for you, Tri-Rail is a great investment, and it helps alleviate some of the local traffic congestion. It could.
I believe that this is a good positive step that brings into downtown, and I think the investment is wise. Compared to the North Corridor, which if we had to invest in it today, and the money we don't have would be something about $150 million, and if we did it by the projected date of 2030, it would be $500 million. So I think the savings is there. I think it's a no-brainer, quite honestly, to be able to bring it into downtown.
So the way you see it, and I want to ask you about all aboard, but the way you see it right now is that with light rail, we use existing infrastructure
yes.
that doesn't require a lot of capital improvements?
We believe it's a minimal capital improvement because there has to be some work done. But we're going to be having a meeting shortly with CSX and FEC and a lot of the different stakeholders to start kind of mapping up and having this discussion. Our cost estimate is that, and I'll give you an example, east-west from the MIC, that could literally get us all the way out to 137th Avenue in Kendall, okay? That's a cost of about $120 million. In the scheme of things, $120 million is a lot of money as far as I'm concerned, but in the scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket, and it's very doable. And we could literally connect and give an option, most importantly, give an option to folks out in the west end of our county that's real.
Where do you see the different hubs? Because in order to make this work, you have to have access to different locations. One of the things that we've done is that, you know, it's always just one from here, from point A to point B. And Miami-Dade County is very, very spread out. So where are the different hubs in a perfect world that you say, this is where you would park and here and here and here and here?
Right. Well, hypothetically, if we were able to complete, let's say an east-west line for argument's sake, we could see a station, for example, at Northwest 87th Avenue. we could see one at 107th. The one at 107th is very interesting because FIU
it connects FIU South,
exactly,
the main campus.
It could run a trolley up to the station. So if you could kind of picture where Dolphin Mall is and an International Mall, there could be a hub created there, a transit hub, where people could go park their car and then take the train.
Okay, so you said a word. You said trolley.
Yeah.
So you envision that you have different vehicles that help make the light rail work. It's not just you park your car and then you're free.
There has to be synergy, without a doubt, yes. And I believe in the scenario I just mentioned, FIU has a huge parking problem. Any student that goes there, anybody that's been ever a student at FIU knows it's historical. We have a parking problem at FIU. So perhaps FIU, which runs a trolley, by the way, now to their engineering school, which is only, you know, maybe half a mile short of the intersection I'm talking about where the hub could possibly be. So FIU literally could run a trolley up there 24/7, or as long as this campus is open, up and down the whole day. So you could imagine a student, perhaps in Hialeah, could hypothetically take the Metro Rail to the MIC, get a transfer, get on now Tri-Rail heading west, get off on 107th, and then take a trolley into FIU. Doesn't take their car to FIU.
In all of it, in all of the work that you see, how many cars do you think you need to take off the highways today in order to make traffic flow? 20%? Are we looking at 20, 25%?
That could be a good working number, Helen. It's very hard to estimate, and I don't want to. I'm not an engineer, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, so I don't want to get too cute on trying to answer a question like that. I will tell you this: we have about 2.5 million residents in our county. Perhaps more than half drive, and then you have people that drive in our community. So we're talking to what, maybe 1.5 million cars in our community, all at any given time.
Plus those who come in from other counties,
Absolutely.
who work in Broward, who live in Broward and work in Miami-Dade, or vice versa.
Absolutely.
So all aboard Florida. Are you in favor? Is this a good idea?
I think it's a good idea because I think once All Aboard Florida is established, and All Aboard's goal obviously is downtown Miami through Broward, Palm Beach, up to Orlando. But what it does is that same rail line is afforded now to us to be able to feed the Northeast. That means all the coastal. In fact, close to the station, there's a rail line that runs right behind the station. All Aboard Florida could activate, again, different hubs along the northeast coast of our county, and you could have one literally close to the station here.
Right here at Channel 2, WPBT2.
Absolutely.
And this is not a plug.
No, but it's a reality,
good to know.
and it gives people in Aventura, it gives people all along this line an opportunity. The north end of our county, Helen, has close to 1 million residents. I mean, so giving them real transportation possibilities, those are the two easy ones. The east-west is the one that's a little bit more challenging, and it's the one that I think we need to do.
And I've got to wrap up. Once again, you look at the possibility of tourist tax, which requires, in order to expand that, you need to go to Tallahassee for that.
We need to go to Tallahassee.
And then number two, you also envision the opportunity for additional funding.
We look at MDX. We're looking at private-public partnerships as another option. And we think we need to look at efficiencies in the way we do transit today to create some of the money.
Commissioner Esteban Bovo, thanks so much for joining us today on Issues.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Helen Foray. On today's program, All Aboard Florida is preparing to begin rail work between West Palm Beach and Miami. Where will we see a bigger benefit, with tourism or local commuting? But first, South Florida residents are all too familiar with daily traffic congestion. A decade ago, residents of Miami-Dade County were hopeful a half-penny tax would help traffic by funding upgrades to public transportation. But that's not been the case. As our community continues to grow, what are the real solutions? Joining me to share his ideas on fixing traffic, we welcome Miami-Dade County Commissioner Esteban Bovo.
I'm concerned, but we have a car culture in our community, and we have to address that first. Our generation, Helen, for better or for worse, have been weaned on by getting a car and moving with a car. It's very rare to see a family today that does not have at least 2 or 3 cars parked in their house. If you take that car culture and realize the only way we've done transit up to this point really has been expanding highways, expanding roads, and MDX now plays a big role in that. The tolling of MDX has driven people mad. You know, we've heard and we've had conversations with families. They're saying to us, Commissioner, I'm spending $200 a month in Hialeah. You get on 8th Street, and now you're taxing roads with traffic that weren't designed for that volume of traffic. So it all kind of brings us all to the center of an argument of saying, folks, what kind of real transit options are we going to give folks? How can I give something to the folks coming east-west that may force them or give them an option to say, I'm going to leave my car at home or I'm going to park someplace and then ride?
Well, people do that illegally, perhaps, with Uber and Lyft.
Well, Uber and Lyft has come into the market and has now started filling a void, which I think there's a generation, maybe not my generation, but...
The new chair of the County Commission's Transit and Mobility Services Committee, he also chairs District 13. Commissioner, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you wrote an op-ed that came out in the Miami Herald this week, which says, it's titled, Let's Provide Residents with Real Transit Solutions. Nobody would disagree with you. And one of the first things people would say is, please stop making studies. They're expensive. Don't know if anybody ever really reads them, but we need something now.
We think all the studies have been done. We don't think there needs to be any more studies. The reality is that we understand. It's very common sense as far as tolls between my car, my wife, and my kids' cars. You know, $200 a month to a family is critical, I believe. And if you carry it out for the entire year, that's a substantial amount of money that's being spent just on tolls.
It tends to be a regressive tax that affects the poor in particular, because the poor live further out and work inside, and those are the ones who have to pay the biggest
It
tax.
affects the poor. It affects businesses that need the highways to carry you know, merchandise and whatnot. And I think the other thing that's been happening, Helen, is that now drivers are seeking alternatives. I need to get off 836 so I don't pay tolls. So what do? You get on Fly